Hi, my name is Sarah Holslander. This presentation covers research I made while writing a paper titled The Middle Ages Strike Back, the Revival of Medieval Music from the 1800s to the Present. In the early 1900s, Suzanne Bloch wrote about her experiences with early music, and medieval music in particular. I discovered the miracle of playing a simple piece well on the lute, of feeling the magic created by the sound of the instrument. This wondrous hush, this spell on the audience. It was as if suddenly the breath of the past were upon us all, making us forget the noises, the tensions of our times. She was speaking the thoughts shared by the champions of early music that emerged in the first few decades of the 20th century, individuals who became entranced with the bracing sounds of the forgotten music of the Middle Ages, the era covering the years between 500 and 1400 BC. Beginning in the 19th century were the rustles of a full-blown revival of early music. Due to the efforts of musicians and researchers from the 19th century to the present day, medieval music is now an established part of classical music performance, music education, and both classical and popular music composition. However, that was not always so. According to early musicologist Todd McComb, before the days of Mozart and Haydn, composers' music would typically be played during the duration of his or her life, and then forgotten in the next several decades afterwards. Therefore, generation after generation, a cycle of new music would age, dwindle, and finally lie fallow, waiting to be remembered and resurrected. For centuries, the music of the Middle Ages was one of these forgotten generations. The first awakenings of interest in early music came as attentiveness to Baroque music during the Romantic generation, an understandable era for the Romantics, since it was the last forgotten era of music since the more permanent classical era. Samuel Wesley was one of these individuals, giving organ concerts of Bach's music in London and publishing editions of his music. Felix Mendelssohn revived Bach's music in Germany with a widely acclaimed performance of Bach's St. Matthew Passion. As Bach and other Baroque composers became part of the concert repertoire, audiences and musicians looked back again, and even further this time, and that led them to peek into the heretofore forsaken realms of Renaissance and medieval music. A pivotal musician in this backward search was Arnold Dolmetsch. This French-born instrument maker and performer spent most of his life reviving early music in England. He first researched different medieval and Renaissance instruments that had been long forgotten: viols, lutes, early keyboard-style instruments, recorders, and other wind instruments. He then proceeded to carefully construct accurate replicas. He passed along this passion for these instruments and the music that used them by teaching at Dulwich College in London, as well as serving as a private consultant to several influential early music specialists at the time: Suzanne Bloch, Gunther Helwig, Ralph Kirkpatrick, and many others. Also hugely influential was Dolmetsch's connection with George Bernard Shaw. Shaw enthusiastically reviewed the London concerts Dolmetsch hosted, spreading the influence of Dolmetsch's early music revival far beyond London into Europe. As time progressed in the 20th century, musicians interested in early music began to think that it was not enough to just play early music. They wanted to accurately play this music. A trend emerged in the 1950s, led by ensembles such as Concertus Musicus Wien in Europe, which resulted in earnest research and performance practices for Renaissance and medieval music. These musicians steeped themselves in not only just the instruments and the music of the medieval and Renaissance eras, but also in the stylistic aspects of early music performance. This trend is often called historically informed performance, or HIP. Proponents of historically informed performance generally looked for three things: authenticity in instrumentation, authenticity in notation interpretation, and authenticity in emotional gesture and content. Much had already been done in finding authentic instruments. Next came the reading of the score correctly. The Urtext editions grew highly popular, as such scores contained only the definitive markings of the composer and were not heavily edited in the fashion of the Romantic era. However, for early music, and especially for medieval music, deciphering what the composer intended to write was no small task. Our modern notation system is derived from the breve of Ars Nova and presents less difficulties. But rhythm in the Ars Antiqua was far more difficult. Authenticity in emotional gesture and content proved complicated too. Performers deeply interested in authentic performance required a high degree of scholarship, for there are no recordings of music from the early music era. Writings, books, and letters, often in antiquated languages, were their only sources to draw from. These musicologist performers used everything from tunings to phrasing to articulation to structure to help uncover the intent of a musical generation so far removed from our time and culture. Of course, in this intense hotbed of dedicated scholarship, individual performers, ensembles, and festivals dedicated to early music began to abound. Solo performers whose careers depended upon period instrument performance entered the music profession. These include Susan Addison, who has dedicated her life to sackbut performance and early trombone performance. Stafford Cape was a musicologist and conductor who founded the influential Pro Musica Antiqua ensemble in 1933. Based in Brussels, Belgium, the group went on to record hundreds of early music pieces, some of them never before performed, under his direction. David Monroe founded the Early Music Consort that spread authentic early music performances over Europe. In the United States, a notable example of the creation of an early music festival was the Pro Musica New York, under the direction of choral expert Noah Greenberg in 1952. Performers who have spent their lives in this pursuit wanted to pass their scholarship on to inspire another generation of musicians. Thus, a plethora of early music divisions and courses of study have emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. The renowned Juilliard School of Music in New York has a series of graduate degrees and performer certificates specializing in authentic early music performance, complete with a faculty that works exclusively in the field of early music. This department was deemed such an important addition to the conservatory that $20 million was allotted to build up a superior department. Similar facilities dedicated to teaching historically accurate performance now exist at Peabody Conservatory of Music, the New England Conservatory, the University of Montreal, and numerous European universities and conservatories. The full-fledged interest in early music today has led to new discoveries of medieval music. For example, just 2 years ago, a set of medieval songs, the Songs of Consolation, was performed for the first time in 1,000 years. This was a monumental production. The performers first had to decipher the neumes, the musical notation of that era. They used other pieces of music and historical documents from various museums and libraries to reach a consensus. Then came the actual performance in the hands of the three-piece group Sequentia. This group has rigorously researched the times and music of the era and hosts a significant repertoire of known medieval music in their heads. This extensive experience and available field of connotation made them invaluable in deciphering the intent of this new music and being able to give the most accurately informed performance possible. Such interest in early music has led to medieval and Renaissance elements bleeding into a neo-early music influence in both classical and popular music composition. Of course, one of the most prominent examples of early music influence in classical music, particularly the medieval era, is in Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, in which he employs both medieval poetry and some of the accompanying medieval melodies, though Orff mostly used melodies of his own making, simply influenced by the medieval style. In popular music, neo-medieval rock bands are common in both Europe, particularly Germany, and United States. Sopor Arturnus and the Ensemble of Shadows is a band based in Hessen, Germany, and draws inspiration from medieval themes for their dark music. Côté à Elle is another Germany-based band, and several of their performers have been classically educated in early music. The trio strives to bring the medieval ages to modern times by creating emotions common to both eras in their music. Early music, and medieval music in particular, has come roaring back, and it's here to stay. From the glimmerings of interest in the early 19th century to the astounding proliferation of scholarly interest and performance in our present day, the music of the Middle Ages has spoken to our generation and become an integral part of our culture through authentic music performances, new schools and programs, and classical and even popular musical influence. Suzanne Bloch was right. The breath of the past is upon us all.